return to the status quo ante before the violent rupture in relations between them 6 months or so ago. This is a very important development because the disunity in the Palestinian ranks has led to their enemies rejoicing, their friends despairing, and has rendered impossible any real possibility of political progress. So we should congratulate the negotiators who have reached this agreement. We should pray that these negotiations come to a satisfactory conclusion and that one unified Palestinian national movement can face the future, can face their enemies, and can appeal to the world. And if my film, if it ever gets made, can do anything to help that, then I'll be very glad indeed. Some of you know this, some of you don't, so let me explain. I'm often asked, I was asked in the Gulf, how come you're so involved in this Palestine question? Was your father Arab, or do you have any Arabic blood in you? People ask me these things all the time, which my mother really gets offended by. The truth is, it was entirely by chance. In the summertime of 1975, I was alone in the Labour Party office in a Scottish city called Dundee, in the northeast of the country. I was 21 years old. I had never met an Arab before. I had never met a Muslim before. There were virtually no Muslims in the city, and as far as I knew, no Arabs. And I was alone in the Labour Party office when the door rang, and I almost didn't answer it because I was busy and I didn't want to be disturbed. But something, kismet, as I say, destiny, prevailed on me to answer the door, and I did. And standing at the door was a very handsome young Palestinian man. I thought he looked like Omar Sharif, but I thought all Arabs looked like Omar Sharif in those days. And he introduced himself as the leader of the local branch of the General Union of Palestinian Students at Dundee University, which was a mile or so up the road. He said that he wanted to come in and speak to the leaders about Palestine. I told him there are no leaders here, but you can speak to me and I'll speak to them. And so in he came. After 2 hours in which he described in mesmeric detail, I was a fully signed up soldier in the Palestinian resistance, and I have remained so ever since, 33 long years. So I wish we could get him on the streets for this election, because he's obviously a very persuasive chap. But actually he left politics and went to become a multi-millionaire builder in Dubai, leaving me to carry the flag, but that's another story. He recruited me to this cause, and I've been in it ever since. That was in 1975. In 1977, I went to Lebanon for the first time to visit the Palestinian Revolution, which was headquartered there under the leadership of the late President Yasser Arafat. I fell in love with this cause and this place so much that when my friends left, I stayed. And every day I would go and have breakfast with President Arafat. He would feed me from his own hands. I became deeply absorbed in this cause. And thereafter, of course, it was personal, not just political for me. When the Palestinian camps were being bombed in Lebanon, and they described it on the news as an attack on a terrorist base, I knew that this was no terrorist base. This was a refugee camp, and these people were not terrorists, but merely victims of terrorism. From that involvement, which lasted, as I say, from 1975 until now, I became more and more involved in the wider Arab world and the wider Muslim world beyond. I had visited most Arab countries by the time of the attack on Iraq in 1991. but I had not visited Iraq because I would have been arrested if I had. Because from the late 1970s, I was an active opponent of the Saddam regime in Iraq because I was sympathetic to and aligned with the Iraqi Communist Party, which had been in partnership with Saddam and then fell out with him and was driven from the country into exile. And so I had never visited Iraq. But whatever differences I had with the Iraqi regime were as nothing compared to the differences I had with the idea of 29 countries, armies, navies and air forces pulverizing Iraq and driving it back into the Stone Age. It's not that I approved of the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, I didn't. Although I said then and I say now that Kuwait is a part of Iraq and was taken by the British imperialists from Iraq. And a false state of Kuwait was created precisely so that the Western imperialists could control it and the black gold under its soil and the gas that was in its waters and its strategic place. But of course, you can't solve problems of borders under colonialism by simply invading the country that was taken from you and reunifying it against the will of the people who lived there. So I was against the occupation of Kuwait, but I was much more against what happened next. The massacre of retreating Iraqi forces, and that famous Turkey shoot that those of you old enough to remember that war will recall, when American pilots would be physically sick getting out of their planes as they explained to their officers that it had been like shooting fish in a barrel as they rained down death and destruction, shooting in the back a retreating army that was heading for home. The destruction of Iraq's electricity and water and sewage and hospitals and schools and essential civilian infrastructure, all of which are illegal under international law, under the laws of war, was sickening indeed to behold. But what happened next was even worse. If Iraq lost a lot of people in the war, if Iraq suffered a lot of damage in the bombardment during the war, it was to suffer much, much more in the policy which the late Pope John Paul called the slaughter of the innocents, and what the American Democratic Congressman David Bonnier, who was the chief whip of the Democratic Party in the US Congress, congressman for Michigan, he described it as infanticide masquerading as politics. I refer, of course, to the long period of so-called economic sanctions